Mr. Hart, hello, how are you doing today?
Let's see. I'm still an American citizen for the moment, and apologize for our country. And I'm still getting my Social Security, and I'm still writing. So that's my standard answer.
First of all, I wanted to thank you for taking your time to speak with me today.
Mhm.
Um, for saying yes to this interview because I really like your work as an aspiring screenwriter.
And where are you in Spain? Are you in Spain?
Yes, I am in Spain. Right now, I'm a film student. I'm in my second year
But where?
in Madrid.
Ah, okay. Good. I have friends in Madrid. Good place. Good.
Yeah, and well, my first question that I wanted to ask you, it is, I mean, it's a very simple question, but I, I'm really curious to know how is your writing process? How
Oh,
would you
whoa.
describe it?
Wow. Well, um, I learned from Coppola that writing a script requires pre-production, just like the movie shoot requires pre-production. So in my process, the last thing you do is write the script. I have a whole discipline called the HartChart that is used all over the world. I'm actually doing a workshop with the HartChart in Puglia next week. So I start with a series of basic questions I have to answer about my characters. And if I can't answer those questions, I'm not ready to write. Once I answer the core questions about the characters, that gives me a three act structure that's character driven, not plot driven. Uh, Plot driven is where most of us started. It's got to be about the plot. But what you quickly learn is that nobody cares about the plot if you don't care about the characters. The third thing I do is identify signposts in my narrative structure. Structure's your friend, not your enemy. Um, once I identify the signposts and I've answered the questions, I've actually written a treatment. By answering the questions, you're writing. And I learned I learned the questions from Coppola when we were working on Dracula. And We got into a little trouble in the editing room, and he brought me in to work with him uh, and analyzed the existing cut of the film. And we realized that we'd missed this, we'd missed that, we should have shot that, we cut that out. Um, and I kept saying to Francis, "What can I do as a writer to solve these problems before we get in the editing room, before you shoot? Is there a way, is there some kind of tool we can develop that helps writers analyze their own problems, or helps analyze the script's problems before you shoot?" And he gave me the three core questions, and I built the whole, here it is. I built the whole regimen around it. You can see how thick my toolkit is. That's it. You don't need any more than that. It's a working writer's toolkit that I developed after working with Francis, and I use it every day. I don't start my process without answering those questions. I don't start writing until I've done all the signposts. So you really do have a lot of documentation about your story and your character before you start writing the script. So the script you're actually sitting there adapting. I'm doing it right now on a project. I've got a 40-page document that is the story with the characters, and I'm adapting that to the screenplay. So that's the short answer.
And you have mentioned Coppola, and I really like the picture that it's in the
Oh,
wall.
there he is. Yes. Yeah, he watches over my shoulder to make
Yeah,
sure I'm doing it right. So Yeah, that's by Albert Watson, a very famous photographer and a close friend. He gave that to me when we were doing Dracula. Uh, so
Yeah, very good.
it became my guardian, my
Yeah,
disciplinarian.
yeah. And well, now continuing talking about your writing process, I also wanted to ask you, when you're facing a blank page, how do you distinguish between a clever idea that leads to a dead end and a story that has the potential to become a feature film?
First of all, I don't face a blank page. It says right here on the cover, never face a blank page again. Um, by answering the questions, you're writing. And once you have the idea, and once you start populating that idea with characters, you're gonna need those characters to sell your to develop your idea into a narrative. So I start by asking the questions of my characters. What do you want? What are you afraid of? What do you need? What do you hate? What do you know? What's your biggest fear? What's your wound? What's your secret? Why now? Why not a year ago? So once you start answering these questions, you develop the narrative. In terms of knowing what works or what doesn't work, that's entirely up to the audience. You know, if you get your film made or your TV episode made, your series made, it doesn't matter how good you are, how talented you are. The audience will decide whether or not you're a success. The greatest filmmakers in the world have had huge failures, you and that's because the audience uh, determined that this was not going to be something that they were going to support uh, in any way, in any meaningful way. So nobody knows what the audience, everybody tries to predict what the audience wants. Doesn't work that way. Hook was deemed a failure when it was released in 1991. Um, Spielberg still doesn't like the film. Um, it was deemed a failure. The reviews were not great. The box office was okay, but it wasn't what the expectations were of the studio and the filmmakers. It's gone on to be a gigantic worldwide phenomenon of a film. And that's because the audience made that happen. The audience discovered Hook, and the audience made it kind of the beloved classic that it's become, which is amazing to me. That's how powerful the audience is. So to try to predict what you think the audience is going to respond to, I have some more questions in my toolkit about the audience. You know, they're now part of my writing process. I bring the audience with me as if we're writing the script together, or we're seeing the movie together. But to predict what the tastes are, all the algorithms, all the guru stuff about what'll work and what won't work, the audience is their own judge and jury. The audience determines what's successful and what's not.
Yeah, and and you know, uh, that's very interesting. And my next question has uh, something related to what the audience wants. Uh, More specifically, you are a teacher, and what I wanted to ask you is, what do you see is the most common internal ghost, to put it that way, or fear that you see in young writers today? And how do you help them exercise it through their scripts?
I'm sorry about the fear that young writers have, but the
Yes.
um, well, the first thing I try to do is make writing a mechanical process
Mhm.
with our approach to writing the toolkit. I take all the mystery out of it and boil it down to homework. You answer these 10 questions. You answer like having a test at school. And it forces the writer to write because they have to answer the questions. And if they can't answer the questions, they're not ready to write. So I try to take the mystery out of the writing process. There is that there's what I call brain blizzards when you have brainstorms and you just write the idea, the scenes that come to you, just write. Then once you've done that, go back and take the discipline of the toolkit and the tools that we've created to take that brain blizzard and start forming it into uh, scenes and signposts. And so it's like your car, you need to fill it up with gas, or you got a flat tire, you change the flat. It needs a paint job, you got a paint job. The oil needs changing, you change the oil. So you take the writing process and demystify it. Take the supernatural, guru, philosophical element out of it and make it a mechanical process that anybody can at least attempt to write by using uh, our tools. They're practical. It's not Save the Cat, which is a great book. It's not Ride the Alligator, which is a great book. It's not Robert McKee, which is that thick, you know, and most people take it off their shelf one time and never go back to it. I use the toolkit every day because it is for a working writer. It is for a writer who has a deadline or has an assignment or has a director waiting or an agent waiting or a producer waiting or a teacher waiting. It it streamlines the writing process, and I think that I've had I teach at the David Lynch Graduate School of Cinematic Arts. I have students today. All of them use the chart, and they use what we call the story compass, and it has completely changed their writing process. There's you can still be afraid, but at least you have a mechanical process to help you get through that fear. And the story compass is new. It's like having your own private mentor that's trained in all of our disciplines that you can actually get your script analyzed as you're writing it. Theme, character, structure, weaknesses, strengths, um, and it gives you feedback as you're writing. So you don't have to go hand it to um, people, outside parties unread or are not proofed or you haven't had feedback. It's just like having your own private mentor. So those are the things that I try to do to make the writing process fun and exciting, as opposed to I don't know where to start. So my phrase is never face a blank page again. I don't believe in writer's block. I don't believe that I think it's a mental condition that's avoiding the responsibility you have as a writer. Writer's block to me is an excuse. If you have the right tools, you can write some shitty pages, but they won't be blank. They might be crap, but at least you have a process that works. So, okay, that's my long-winded answer.
Well, I mean, I agree with what you said about about the writer's block, and here is the thing. Like I said, I want to be an screenwriter, and something that I do. This is an advice that my screenwriting teacher gave to me and to my class. Every time you get an idea at the moment, write it down immediately, immediately, because he told us a story about, yeah, yeah,
Keep a notebook
absolutely.
handy.
I mean, he told us a story about a writer who had a dream, woke up woke up in the middle of the night, and the writer thought that that was a good idea. But then he went back to sleep, and when he woke up in the morning, he forgot it.
Yeah.
So now every time I have my own list of ideas that because I constantly get any ideas, and some of them I don't think they make sense, honestly, but I think I can make something out of this. I feel I can make something out of this. But the problem, I mean, at least the problem that I have is that sometimes I, in my free time, I practice writing, and sometimes I feel like I describe too much, and other times I feel like I'm too short. I mean, I don't know if I'm explaining myself.
Well, no, but you're talking about style. Um, one of my students just started over, just rewrote her whole script using a minimalist, what we call a minimalist format, where you try to do not more than one or two lines of description before you move to the next, not scene, but the next part of the scene where you need to describe something else. So you're not writing a paragraph of 10 lines. You're giving as much white space as you can on the page. And it's okay to over describe in your first draft or over describe in your treatment because that's where you do that. You want to know, you want everything that you need to know about the scene on the page, like your dream. You don't want to forget your dream. So then what you do, but is you go back and do what I call line edits. You try to find if you could take one or two words out of a line and shift the page up, you're making it easier to read. And the minimalist, my daughter writes, she's a writer director. She writes minimalist. You know, very sparse dialogue, very little description. You know, you don't need to set design. You don't need to design the set. That's a set designer's job. You know, if you're doing the Roman Colosseum or you're doing a bar or a nightclub, maybe one or two things that are unique to that nightclub. You know, but you don't need to describe the setting in detail, except in your treatment or in your notes to yourself. So you know what you're seeing. Uh, that to me is the most important skill to learn is to be able to leave a lot of white space on the page for readers. Producers don't like to read dense scripts. Agents don't like to read dense scripts. You know, the only people who maybe like to read dense scripts are maybe directors, or especially if and also a director usually writes minimalist because the director has it here. So my rule is get as much white space on the page as you can. Yeah, and I actually look at the page when I finish to see what it looks like on the page. If I've got 5 paragraphs of description, I'm already scaring off a reader. You know, if I've got 5 paragraphs in a row with, you know, 10 lines of description, I'm reading a book. And a screenplay is not a book. You know, a screenplay is a roadmap. The book is where all of that density and detail is allowed by the format. Not so in the screenplay. At least, and when you're starting out, you need to make it as easy to read as possible for the readers because they're looking for any excuse they can to close that script and put it over here and pick up the next one and start reading. That's it takes a while. It's not something I'm still doing learning. It's not something that comes to you easily. But it is a learned skill. You're being an editor. You're editing. You know, nobody wants to read, you know, 2 or 3 paragraphs of description. Not in our business. You know. At least from my experience on this side of the pond, is they really want a minimalist, lean um, uh, read that suggests what they're seeing and gives you mainly its character.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have mentioned that producers don't like to read scripts. And, something that I wanted to ask you is that out of all the scripts that you have written, that that uh, couldn't get pro, pro sorry, that couldn't get produced. Um, which one do you consider to be your lost masterpiece? To
I don't. I have more than one.
Yeah,
So that's, I probably have five passion projects that I'm running out of time. I'm older now, so a couple of them I've been on for over 25 years trying to get them made. And we still keep trying. I've got four or five that are, different genres, different times in my career, that I would still like to get done. The Snow Goose is a book, um, by Paul Gallico that was written in the 40s about, um, it's a beautiful novella that, Emily Blunt wanted to do when she was a young actor. Scarlett Johansson wanted to do when she was a young actor. I mean, they literally tracked me down to do the script. And then by the time they were meaningful in the business, they were too old.
yeah,
So now Scarlett is directing, and we're going back to her to see if maybe she wants to direct the Snow Goose. If see what the script, if it held up that way. Um, Sirens of Titan, Kurt Vonnegut, I've been trying to do since I was in college. We've had the rights a couple of times. We worked with Kurt Vonnegut a couple of times before he passed away. Um, a script about the Kent State shootings, which is May 4 today, where the students were shot by National Guard troops protesting the Vietnam War. I'm still working on that one. I have four or five that I'm determined to try to find a way to get done before it's too late for me.
yeah,
It's you have to be willing to put up with being declined or turned down or passed over, or the industries are not interested in that project at the time. So uh, Hook took um, Hook took 10 years. Dracula took 17 years. Contact took 8 years. Um, Tuck Everlasting was like a 15-year. It takes, nobody wanted to do Dracula. Nobody wanted to do Hook, until
yeah,
Spielberg and Coppola read the scripts. So usually the ones that are easy to do are not worth it. The ones that come to you and and they're not really yours, or you're hired to come in and do it, and it's easy, it gets made, and then you're not satisfied.
yeah.
I think it's the hard ones that are the most satisfying and the most frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, there is a, a, a reason why I ask you this because there is something. This is a little hobby of mine that I like to do sometimes. Is that I have a list of unproduced scripts that got published by many screenwriters, and sometimes when I have free time, I read some of them, even if I don't like them, because this is something that I remember. This was said by Alan Moore, the writer of Watchmen. He said that you have to read bad books or books that you don't like to know what you don't want to do in your in your project. And yeah, some of those scripts that I have, for example, one of them is about Hernán Cortés, which was written by Nicolas Cafin, for example.
And what are you asking? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. That my next question it is about, well, the first movie of yours that I watched, that is, Bram Stoker's Dracula,
Okay.
which uh, which is a movie that I really love. To me, it's one of my favorite interpretations of Dracula, and has one of the to me one of the best lines in cinema, which is I traveled oceans of time to find you, which is fantastic. And and the question that I wanted to ask you is the decision to turn Dracula's story into a love story, um, instead of making it like, you know, a, a horrifying predator, even though he sometimes looks like that in the movie. I wanted to know, how did you balance the predatory nature of Dracula with that romantic journey?
Well, I started by reading the book, and the book has nothing to do with most of the Dracula movies made. Um,
Yeah,
uh, in the book, Stoker wrote about Dracula being a Christian knight that was sworn to protect the cross of Christ, that was fighting the Turks to protect all Christendom. I'd never seen a Dracula like that. In my research, um, Tepes, he married a Turkish woman, which was the Turks hated the fact that that their Muslim uh, sister, married a Christian.
yeah,
And there was a great romance between the two of them, and that in Stoker, um, and in the research, um, uh, Vlad Dracula went into battle against the Turks, and was victorious, but the Turks were so angry that they sent a letter to his wife saying that they had killed Dracula and they were coming for her. And the Turks were known to be, uh, sadistic torturers if they found a traitor or an infidel or something, And
absolutely.
she committed suicide. All that's in history. She jumped off
Yeah,
into the Argus River, and that to me gave me license to because everybody wanted to know who made Dracula. How did he get to be a vampire? Who bit Dracula? And I decided nobody bit him. He went to war with God for taking his wife from him, who, according to the religion, could never go to heaven, had to remain in hell and purgatory forever because of suicide. So that to me is the beginning of a great romance. I mean, 400 years later, and then Dracula he turns into a vampire and bloodletting and all that kind of stuff. But he's still that there was a great love there. So I decided that the way to tell, oh, I know what it was. That's one thing. The other thing is that I went to see the play Dracula with Frank Langella playing Dracula on Broadway. And it was the old play that all the Dracula movies had been based on. It was what made Bela Lugosi famous. He did it on stage. It had nothing to do with the book, except the vampire coming after Lucy and Mina and what have you. Um, and I went to see it opening night with my mentor, Leonard Wolf, who was born in Transylvania and a scholar in terms of vampires. Um, and we sat there in the theater on opening night, and Frank Langella was the first romantic, kind of charismatic matinee idol to play Dracula. Christopher Plummer, Jack Palance, some of the other, not Christopher Plummer, but Christopher Lee, who played Dracula. They were not handsome, good-looking. Bela Lugosi was not handsome. I never could figure out what the attraction was. Everybody was afraid of them because they were horrible. So Frank Langella comes along and is playing this Errol Flynn, matinee idol, Dracula. And there's a moment in the film, if you remember, where he opens up his chest and she drinks his blood. In the play, that had never been done. And in the play, the end of Act One is Frank Langella's Dracula in bed with Lucy in this case, and he opens up his pirate shirt and pulls her to his chest, and the audience gasps, and the lights go down and the curtain drops. It's the act break, and there's dead silence in the audience before the applause, and sitting in front of me were five women with big hair, And I kept going like this to watch the play. And before anybody spoke or applauded, the woman sitting right in front of me announced in a very loud voice, I'd rather spend one night with Dracula dead than the rest of my life with my husband alive. And everybody just cracked up. And I went, oh my God, that's it. It's a woman's film. It's about the women. It's not about the men. And I don't know who she was. I thank her in every one of these interviews. I hope she's still with us. But she gave me the decoder ring. This had to be a great romance. And I already had the basis of it in actual history between Vlad Tepes Dracula and his his wife who committed suicide. Yeah, even the Order of Dracul was a sacred order. It was a sacred Christian order that was pledged to defend the church. I had not seen that Dracula. So the other one for me, since I'm from Texas, I always thought that Dracula died by getting a stake in the heart. And you read the book, that's not the case. One, it has to be a steel spike. You have to cut off their head and cut out their heart in order to kill them, or they'll come back. That's why the stake doesn't work. Take the stake out in their back. So I read in the book, there's this big shootout, like a John Ford Western at the end. And a Texan with a Bowie knife kills Dracula, slits his
Yeah.
throat, stabs him in the heart. And I went, holy shit, all these years, where's the Texan with the Bowie knife in all these Dracula movies? So I said, okay, it's a romance, it's a woman's film, and I got a Texan with a Bowie knife that's going to kill Dracula. So I'd never seen that Dracula. And it turns out that Coppola, it was his favorite book that he would read out loud when he was a camp counselor at camp to scare the boys to stay in bed and not horse around. So he loved the book. I didn't know that. So when he read the script and saw how much of the book was in the script, that's when he told Winona Ryder, "Yes, I'll do it." She gave him the script. Um, I never would have gotten to Coppola had it not been for Winona.
Yeah.
So
And
I think that answers your question.
yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned the shooting in the book that you said that is like a Western
Yeah,
of John Ford.
yeah.
And I got to say, I believe if John Ford made an adaptation of Dracula, I think he definitely would have made the Texan man the protagonist of the movie.
Yeah. John Wayne would have played Quincy.
I would have loved that movie, honestly.
Yeah. John Ford's Dracula. That's interesting. Okay. I'll process that one. That's a good one.
Yeah. And before I go to the next question, I wanted to tell you something curious about Dracula, and is that my teacher in cinema history, that his name is Miguel Payan. Uh, One day we talked about just about your script, and he told me, and I wanted to know if you agree with him. He found Van Helsing, your interpretation of Van Helsing, to be he was interested more in him than in Dracula. And I see his point, honestly. I think they're both equally interesting, but yeah, and he told me Van Helsing in this movie is a bastard.
Yeah.
He's a bastard,
He's also Looney Tunes. He's crazy. Yeah.
yeah, and if I remember correctly, there was some talk to making a movie about Van Helsing
Yeah. Yeah.
with
We had it
with
all
the
worked out, and Anthony wanted to do it. Uh, it was unfortunate that we didn't get to do it because they made a couple of Van Helsing movies after that were not very good. They were over the top. It didn't have the tone of Dracula. Yeah, I wrote the story and was ready to write the script. Um, Francis wanted Roman, his son, who had done all the beautiful miniature work and stuff in the film. um, to be able to direct the sequel or the sequel, the story about Van Helsing. And Roman wanted his own writer. He wanted to work for someone that his dad hadn't, that he wanted to have his own creative input and not be relying on his dad's writer. So they paid me a lot of money and they went off and wrote the script and it wasn't very good. It didn't work out. And we lost Anthony to other things. But yeah, I would have done Van Helsing sequels for a long time. I had three or four the Van Helsing Chronicles is what we called it. So yeah, that's one of those that would be nice to have gotten done. At the end of Dracula, the book, 7 years after they killed Dracula on the Borgo Pass on the road, they go back and visit the spot where Quincy died. And Harker and Mina have their 7-year-old son with them. You know, his name is Quincy. Uh, and they brought him back to show where his namesake died. And Leonard Woolf, who's the scholar, um, who knows everything he knew everything there was to know about the history of Dracula and anything else. He always felt like that why, that Mina was bringing Dracula's son back to see where his father died, not Quincy. So that, and Van Helsing became the protector of that child, because other vampire forces wanted that the son of Dracula.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
so that was our premise, and I wish I'd have gotten to do it, but and Van Helsing had never. Francis wanted Van Helsing to be obsessed with Dracula. Been all his life he'd been trying to find him, and also a little bit crazy. You know, he had dueling scars. In the book, his wife had died in an insane asylum, so he carried that guilt with him that he locked her away and she died going crazy. That was part of his backstory and his wound. Very complicated character, and very matter of fact about everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to cut off her head and take her out of heart. Um, Sir Anthony did an incredible job with the character. Yeah,
Probably.
yeah. Francis just turned him loose.
Yeah.
Yeah, when he dances with Mina and smells her and sniffs her,
Yeah.
that was Anthony. That was Anthony in character. You know,
He was amazing.
yeah,
And well, now going to my last question, it has a lot to do with the hook on your shirt, and
yeah.
more specifically about the movie Hook. And I wanted to ask you, in your original version of the script, was the tone darker or more uh, aligned with the melancholic ending of James Barrie's book, where Peter forgets Wendy?
Barry's book is much darker than most people have never read the book. Their orientation to
Definitely.
Peter Pan is Disney,
Yeah,
and Mary Martin and Kathy Rigby in the musical, the Jerome Robbins musical. That's their version of Peter Pan and their version of Hook.
yeah,
You read Barry's novel, which I've read many times. I've got it right here on my desk.
yeah,
Um, and it's a much darker, more grown-up tale than we've ever seen.
yeah.
And um, my script was definitely darker, my original
Mm,
script. Stephen came in and started putting the kid back into it,
mm,
um, including the portrayal of Hook. That was not my Dustin Hoffman was not the Captain Hook that I wrote.
mm.
That's not who I had envisioned in the part. That's not who Barry wrote. I wanted Daniel Day-Lewis in Last of the Mohicans to play Captain Hook. A
Oh,
charismatic matinee idol, somebody who can actually steal your kid from you,
mm,
who had that kind of attraction. I never believed Dustin did a great job, fantastic job, but I never believed he could steal my son from me. You Hey, I'm Peter Pan, come on. Yeah. So and the ending is pretty much the same as I wrote. There was a there was the moment where Toodles gets the marbles and flies it off, and they all have that nice moment together at the window. But it was Steve, and my last line was something else, some something from Barry. It was Stephen that found the line in the play that Barry wrote. It wasn't a dialogue. It was an off screen. It was a screen direction, and Barry's last line in the play was "To live will be an awfully big adventure," but it was never spoken. So Stephen, I think mine was something about every day will be a new adventure or something like that. I didn't want to say to die will be, and Stephen found that line to live will be an awfully big adventure, which I thought was perfect for Robin. Um, I had a much darker tone overall. The scene where Peter finds the burned out uh, hideout under the tree
Yeah.
and finds this is where Tinkerbell's you this and he finds the teddy bear and all that stuff. That's right out of that is directly in my script,
Mm.
and it was a ramping up to him having the happy thought so he could fly. You and Robin is incredible in the scene. Yeah, he's really incredible in the scene. So yeah, I had a darker tone, um, and I think that the way the movie is edited the way I structured it, not the way it was shot. Um, Michael Kahn, the wonderful editor for Steven Forever, kept me informed and kept me in the loop on the editing process. And Steven didn't like the movie. He still doesn't like the movie. I think he accepts the fact that the audience has turned it into a cult classic. But I know he had a very difficult time making the film.
Yeah.
Under pressure for a Christmas release date, he should have had more time with the script to make it his. Um, he had always wanted to do Peter Pan and do it as a musical, and then suddenly Hook showed up, and he dropped everything to do Hook, my wife always knew that would happen. And all of us had Robin, Dustin, Stephen, myself. Robin was turning 40. Stephen and I were in our late 40s. Dustin was in his 50s. We all had kids. We'd all grown up, so we related to the story as parents,
Yeah.
you know. It's a very different movie when you're a parent, So yeah, I went back and read my draft not too long ago, and it is darker and it is more grown up. Yeah. And listen, Stephen was not going to shoot Rufio's death. He cut it out. And
Yeah.
I threw up my hands and went, okay, you're Steven Spielberg. But I wasn't the only one. It was generally that omission was generally not liked by the cast or the crew and or Dante. And I remember one day I was in my little office working on Dracula, and Keith Campbell comes in, who is the Robin's stunt double in the film. And he just goes, "We're going to kill Rufio." And I went, "Yes." So if all Neverland was rotten tomatoes and eggs and marbles and there's no jeopardy. If you can't die, what's the jeopardy? What if Peter can't die in Neverland? If it's all slingshots and skateboards and stuff. So somehow Stephen understood very clearly that Rufio had to die, and it turns out to be one of the most profound moments. You remember when you probably first saw it. One of the most profound moments in the young viewer's movie history is that scene.
I wanted to have a daughter like you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No,
That scene is great.
it's a,
And
now it's not very well structured because Steven had already shot the film. Nobody ever
hmm,
grieves for Rufio.
it-
There's no
I
grief.
noticed that, yeah.
That's because he'd already shot the book on either side of it. But it made Dante Bosco an international star. You know,
Yeah.
he was the first Asian actor to be in a big Hollywood movie like that. And John Chu is now directing because of Dante's. John Chu saw Hook as a kid, and Dante was his became his hero. You know, so it's stuff like that when I hear when it's told to me and I hear it back when people say, "Yeah, the Rufio scene," I was 9 years old, and that's when the audience makes a decision to elevate your work.
Yeah.
The audience did that. Yeah. Uh,
I mean, I think that honestly, I think it's a great movie. And I think that I also think that the script is really good. But you're right that you said that most people didn't read the book because, and this is something that that honestly upsets me a little bit. That if there was an accurate adaptation of Peter Pan, he will be the villain.
yeah,
I
he
mean,
is, and he is in our Hook sequel that Jake and my son and I are working on prequel. Yeah, yeah, Peter is the bad guy.
I mean, if I remember correctly, there was a moment in the book where it's where it is written the kids disappear like in the and what I am supposed to make of this. I mean, Peter Pan,
Peter,
he,
Peter,
he
Peter,
killed him.
Peter, Peter killed them. There were two things that happened. One, and it's a myth because nobody read the book. You do grow up in Neverland just very slowly. You know, Barry talks about it that sometimes the boys would be too old, or they would have a whisker or something, and they would disappear. It's almost like the island threw them off they got too old, so the island got rid of them, or Peter got rid of them. But Barry talks about the fact that it's not true that you don't grow up in Neverland. Uh, you do grow up, and you grow up very slowly, and you reach a certain point where you're too old to stay on the island, or you're going to become an adult. And Peter couldn't handle that. So, he's an asshole, you know,
Yeah,
cocky, arrogant, sexist. But
yeah,
he also was given a very sacred mission by Barry. Peter's job was to lead children to Neverland and escort them because they were dead. They had died
yeah,
in childbirth, they died prematurely, and he was there to escort them to Neverland so they wouldn't be afraid. And that's again another thing that nobody ever that's also in the book. It gives a much darker, more grim job description that Peter has. You know, and it's
yeah,
also because he didn't, he was abandoned as a kid and grew up in Kensington Gardens with the Solomon Caw and taught how to fly, and it was Tinkerbell that took him to Neverland.
yeah,
As an infant. So he grew up. He's an infant, but he grew up. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I remember that I saw a book that I think it came up a few years ago that is titled Lost Boy. And if I remember correctly, the story was like a prequel about Captain Hook when he was a kid that was like adopted by Peter Pan. And that book, the way that book shows Peter Pan is like he's a complete psychopath, you know?
Yeah.
And it shows why Captain Hook is so obsessed on, on killing him because there is something funny, very funny that when I watched the Disney movie, there was a moment where Captain Hook was with Smee, and Smee told them. I mean, they talk about when Peter Pan cut off his hand, and Smee said, "You were playing," and I was thinking, Okay, wait a second. He just cut off his hand just like that because he wanted it. I mean, that doesn't sound very heroic. to me.
This is the book I wrote about Captain Hook,
Yeah.
the origin story, and our film, the script that Jake and I are working. My son, who had the idea for Hook,
Hmm.
the film that we're writing right now, we're finishing writing, opens up with that duel that you've never seen, where Peter cuts off his, and it's not his hand. He cuts off Hook's arm at the elbow,
Hmm.
not his hand.
Yeah.
And it's this one. And so we're showing you Captain Hook went to Eton in England. This is he was a bastard child, and we've done a whole origin story on him. And the Peter Pan game that we're working on is really makes Peter the bad guy. I mean, he's been there so long, and he's gotten so twisted that he's now like Kurtz in Apocalypse Now. He's like Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now. He's killing people. He's got a following. He's bad news on the island. And we tried it as a series. It's hard when we say, what do you mean Peter Pan's a bad guy? But then some people go, "Ooh, that's great. I want to see that." Uh, uh, it's um, it's a very Barry was a very complicated fellow, and he wrote very complicated children's stories. And the fact that nobody and when people read the book, they're blown away when they read the book. Go, whoa, there are witches on Neverland. There's wolves. There's all kinds of mythological creatures. There's drunken fairies. There's a witch. I mean, and that's all in Barry. You know, that's all in him. It's not the cute little Neverland that Disney portrayed or that Stephen did in Hook. You notice there's no Indians in Hook, no Tiger Lily, and I had her in my script, but they were not goofy Native American, stereotypes.
Yeah.
Uh, they were rainbow warriors and Amazon, Amazon warriors and what have you. And she was Princess Ty, but she's not. They're not in Hook. Yeah. Um, I think they felt it was not. Uh, it would have been. It would. They're afraid it would have been controversial. Yeah, and that would only come how they were portrayed. So anyway, I'm rambling here, so I'm not sure I answered your question, but yes, Barry is darker,
Yeah.
definitely.
Absolutely. Definitely. And well, my next question has a lot to do with the directors that you worked on because that you work with, sorry. Because you work with well, Francis Ford Coppola, Steven Spielberg, Robert Zemeckis, and I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, how they uh, protect a screenwriter's vision.
Well, Francis was the best because there were no other writers. He read my script. He was not involved in the development of my script. I wrote it before him. He's a writer, so he knew how hard it was to get that novel to work. And he protected me. He had me all the way through editing. I mean, he had me at rehearsals. He had me at readings. I could be on the set when I could be on the set. And when we got in trouble in the editing room, he invited me. Well, he said, "Get on a plane and come to San Francisco." And we sat in the editing room together for 2 weeks. I mean, he really respected the work that I'd done, as did the actors. Gary, Winona, Sir Anthony, they all fought for the script. They wanted the dialogue. They wanted lines that Francis wanted to cut. They were devoted to protecting the script. So I felt very lucky in that respect. Stephen had several writers come on while I was still there and writing and seeing all the dailies and what have you. Uh, Malia Scott Marmo came on it because Dustin wanted his own writer, and she and I became great friends, and I was happy that she got anointed, and we stayed respectful all the way through the process. I would get the pages every weekend and fax Stephen my notes and what have you. But he had Malia Scott Marmo came on. He brought in Carrie Fisher to rewrite Tinkerbell, which I thought was great because Carrie Fisher was my muse when I wrote Tinkerbell. But then when I saw what happened to Tinkerbell, the edge had been taken off of her. You know, Julia was having to be more of a cheerleader than she was, a pain in the ass getting him in shape. My Tinkerbell was, I thought I had captured, if Carrie Fisher had played Tinkerbell, I thought I had gotten her tone, I mean, foul-mouthed and edgy and critical and self-deprecating, always on Peter's ass, to get in shape and what have you. He also had Tom Stoppard. I have a letter from Tom Stoppard right here, come in and do scenes. Um, and I think that he was trying to find a way to put his Peter Pan story onto my Hook story. And he was having a hard time finding that balance. So I think if he'd had 6 more months with the script, where he really has solved a lot of the problems in his own mind. Plus, he likes to have the script be a living, breathing thing all the way through the shoot. Nothing's ever sacred. If something happens on the set that's better, he'll do it, and he has a million ideas. You know, um, but Francis was the best at protecting me. Stephen respected the original script and stuck to the original story, but he had writers coming and going. I mean, I was always around, always there. I was always in the dailies, always seeing the script and giving notes. But I was busy on Dracula, where I was being very well taken care of. Zemeckis and was never on set for Contact. By the time Zemeckis came on, I had moved on. The director I wanted to work with, who wanted to do Contact, with George Miller. That's the director I would have gone, okay. I want to see what George Miller does with this script. Zemeckis did a great job. It's a fantastic expression of Carl's work, but it didn't end the way Carl and I wanted it to end. And again, the audience does not know what's not there. Like the audience does not know what's not in Hook that was in my script. Same thing with Dracula, same thing with Contact. The audience knows what they see on the screen. And that's a big difference. You don't want to burst that bubble. You don't want to say, well, I told you that Rufio was cut out. Imagine seeing Hook without Rufio's death. You um, Toodles was also cut out. Didn't want the mermaids. Until he found a way to be able to justify why Toodles is in the movie, why the mermaids are in the movie, why Rufio has to die. So what I learned was the job of the screenwriter is to facilitate the director in achieving their vision, not imposing your own on the project or on the director, because that's a good way to get fired, and get replaced. What you hope is that you're subversive enough to figure out a way to get some of your content in there that the director then embraces and says, yes, let's do that. And that's what happened on Hook. Uh, anyway, my favorite director was Brian Henson on The Muppet Treasure Island. We had such a good time, and he was so generous, and just he's a brilliant director. And Muppet Treasure Island is right up there with Hook and Dracula and Contact. It's got a huge following. I had no idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now, now my next question has more to do with with genres, because you have explored many genres, like science fiction to from science fiction to gothic horror. And I want to know, which genre do you find the most challenging to crack emotionally?
Wow. Which genre? I don't have a good answer for that question because what I do now is start with character. So if I start with character, it doesn't matter what genre it is. Uh, it's the characters that I have to be able to invest in and spend time with, regardless of whether it's horror or rom-com or heist or action adventure or sci-fi. It's the characters. So then once you have your hands around the characters and you know them inside and out, there are certain tropes that the genre requires um, be served. The horror film especially probably has the most formulaic um, uh, structure that that is that in the rom-com. The rom-com has a very specific structure that trope-wise that it follows, and that's what the audience wants. The horror film audience, they go to every horror film with an expectation, that there's going to be three or four gotchas, where you jump out of your chair. They know they're going to be there, and they still jump when it happens. Um, Probably the like this the I think the toughest one is when you're doing a true story based on real characters or real live events. And a lot of I'm working with a gentleman right now in Kansas City who wants everything that happened to be exactly as it happened, when it happened, why it happened, regardless of whether it makes any sense in the story or not. So I think the adaptation of a real live event and real live characters is probably the toughest, especially if you're working with someone who's an expert in that field or who is that person. I didn't say that. I didn't do that. That didn't happen. And so trying to explain how you serve the truth of what happened, but it can't be exactly as it happened because it may not work as a story or a character. So I think that's probably the toughest.
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem with something that a lot of, people criticize about biographical movies is that they don't feel they feel more like a Wikipedia article than a movie. And I agree, except when it touches only one aspect of a person's life. I
Yeah.
mean,
Trying to do the whole life is crazy.
there is a movie that I love, which is a Tombstone, and
It's a
with
good, that's George Cosmatos. Not too many people
yeah,
know his work, the director.
he's very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And something that the movie did great. It takes some liberties with the real story, but it focuses only in the gunfight at the OK Corral and the Herb Vendetta Ride. And I think it was great instead of showing the whole life of Wyatt Earp, which I think the movie it wouldn't have been so good that way.
Well, but you also have something. You have um, Val Kilmer playing Doc Holliday,
Yeah,
um, and that relationship becomes one of the core centers of the story. So when Earp goes to see him in the what did they call him in those days? Rehab, not rehab, but he was in a mental hospital. He was in a hospital you go to die. What do they call the sanitarium?
yeah,
That last scene between the two of them is just stunning. And it comes after all the action. If you remember, after the gunfight over Corral, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happens where they're tracking down
yes,
the Red Legs and killing the Red Legs, and Johnny Ringo, Val Kilmer, Doc Holliday goes and kills Johnny Ringo and saves Wyatt. There's a bunch of stuff that happens after the gunfight of the OK Corral. But yes, it focuses around that time, that period of Wyatt's life. We parachute into his life there as opposed to the Kevin Costner Wider, which did a much larger sweeping job of the story. My favorite is John Ford.
yeah.
Have you
My
seen
Darling Clementine.
Darling Clementine? Yeah, that's my favorite.
Yeah.
It
Well,
takes the same thing. It focuses on he comes to town, he gets the cattle stolen, he becomes a sheriff, his brother gets killed. I like how because you're meeting Wyatt already having left his where he was in Texas, and coming to start a new life, with the cattle drive. It's such a good movie in so many ways. And I watch it maybe I watch it once a year. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Just
and
a marvel at the cinematography and the black and white. You
mm,
know, you still feel like you're in well, you're there. You feel like it's in color. You
yeah,
know, that's my favorite one. But Tombstone's great. It was just on not too long ago.
yeah, and also I think that the script by Kevin
Yeah, yeah,
Jarry, which I think he's very underrated. Underrated. His work he doesn't get the acknowledgement that he deserves because the script from Tombstone is one of the best
yeah. It is.
that I have seen.
I liked it better than what's his face? Oh, the writer director. His son's name is Jake as well. Better than the Costner. Yeah,
Yeah,
I thought it was better than the Costner epic. Uh,
yeah,
Jake. Come on. Um, I also thought Costner did a great job in Open Range, which has that wider, kind of feel to it. And I mean, they come in with the cattle drive. The kid gets killed. The cattle get stolen. It's just like Darling Clementine.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there is also one scene in Tombstone that it's one of the best scenes I have ever watched. That is when Doc Holliday meets Johnny Ringo,
Yeah.
and they spoke in Latin. And
Yeah.
then Johnny Ringo shows his skill with the gun, and
Yeah.
then Doc Holliday gets the cup and
Yeah. Those things. Yeah.
imitates him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But but what I love about that scene is that it's full of subtext because what a lot of people didn't notice is that uh, the moment that Doc Holliday does this with the cup, Johnny Ringo is that serious, and it looks like he's kind of scared. And it's true because in just one moment, but by taking one look, Doc Holliday was able to copy all his movements,
Yeah.
and he
Well,
learned
and
that moment
also Doc Holliday never shows any fear.
never.
He never shows. He's always got that smile on his face. You're my Huckleberry. Yeah, he doesn't ever show fear.
He is completely
Yeah.
clear when he says, "I am your Huckleberry." That's just
I'm
my
your
game.
Huckleberry. Yeah. 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 I have to go in a few minutes, so if
Ah,
you have
yes, yes.
a wrap
Sorry.
up question, we could talk. No, we could. This is fun. You're very well versed in your film lore. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Coming for you, that's a great compliment.
Well, uh, you've demonstrated that. So,
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you one last question, uh, and this is a very personal question. If you could go back in time to the beginning of your career and give advice to yourself, what would you say to you?
I would say shut up and listen. Took me a long time to learn to listen, and make room for other people's opinions and reactions. I burnt some bridges because I didn't listen. So I would say shut up and listen and eat your vegetables.
Yeah. I could learn a lot from that advice of eating
Well, that's
vegetables.
I always ask, if you had a superpower, what would it be? Or if you have a superpower, what is it? And my superpower became to listen. That's my superpower is to listen, and make myself aware that that is my superpower as I listen.
Well,
That's the
that's
main thing to do is let other people into the conversation by by learning what it is that makes what they want, what it is that they need, what it is that they are turned on by, what it is that they like, what it is they don't like, why. That's why the questions are so important in the kit. So, and the shameless promotion, you go to HartChart.com and you'll see the story compass, which is we've been testing very successfully, and the toolkit. I
Yeah.
guarantee you that it'll be the best euros you've spent, on yourself. So you use it every day.
I will read it. Well, Mr. Hart, that was my last question.
Okay.
I wanted to again thank you so much for taking your time to make to make this interview. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I hope you were comfortable with
Well,
the questions and everything.
let me leave you with this thought. Okay. It took me a while to realize this. As a writer, start thinking of yourself as more than just a writer, or writer director or whatever, because you're also a job creator. And this was not clear to me until I started watching end credits. And I realized that all of those end credits, all those names, and all those departments, nobody had a job until a writer typed the end. And that's kind of been my mantra, is that nobody has a job in this business till you type the end. And it was Frank Pearson, my mentor, who explained that to me. Even when I was working with Coppola and Spielberg, that those two big directors didn't have a job till you wrote that script. So, that's gotten me through a lot of dark places and raised my self-esteem. It gave me a purpose. Oh, I'm creating jobs. I'm not just writing a script, I'm creating jobs. There are people that are going to have jobs because of my work. So you just look at Netflix when it says, watch credits or skip credits. Don't skip the credits. Watch those credits. Every one of those names needs to thank the writer for writing that script. Uh, that's why they got to work. So I'll leave you with that. And I'm going to
Yeah.
send this to you for your good show gift. But everybody can go to HartChart.com and see what we do.
Well, thank you so much for that and for your advice. And well, I will if you want to, I will send you a message
Sure.
when I
Yeah.
edit the interview and I posted it.
Yeah. Please do. Please do. And we'll send a link to our readers or our users. Yeah. So
Well,
and thank are you in graduate school or are you in what's the level of
I'm
school?
I'm in the you I'm doing a grade of cinematography at the university.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Keep it up. Keep up the good work and keep writing. All right.
Yeah, and and good luck with your next projects.
Thank you, sir. I will keep you posted and let you know when there's going to be something you can watch. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Hart,
Be
thank you
safe.
so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.